time now for the big story, and it's been almost 2 weeks since the Hamas attack on Israel, which led to the death of over 1,300 civilians and the capture of over 200 hostages. There has understandably been widespread condemnation of what happened, but the events of the last 2 weeks has sparked a debate about the root of this conflict, with many Palestinians taking to the streets calling for freedom, whilst at the same time Jewish people being subjected to the highest level of anti-Semitism in many years. So is this a conflict which sees blame on both sides, or do Israel have a case to answer for their treatment of Palestinians? Shortly, I shall be joined by digital activist Lizzy Savetsky. But first, let's speak to war journalist Yara Eid. Yara, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, what is your reaction to what happened on the 7th of October?
I think, this is a misleading question, because if we want to water down what happened to only what's happening on the 7th of October, it actually ignores what's been happening for the last 75 years. I grew up my whole life in Gaza. When I was 14 years old, I saw people being cut into pieces in front of my eyes. And that's actually why I left and I went to the UK. So this kind of violence, this kind of massacres that have been committed, didn't happen just after the Hamas attack on Israel. This is not an unprovoked attack. What's been happening is been years of ethnic cleansing, years of genocide, years of torture and imprisoning children and minors. So we can't talk about what's happening without taking in consideration everything that's been happening since 1948, since the establishment of Israel.
What you've described is truly appalling and absolutely devastating. But do you condemn in isolation that attack 2 weeks ago?
Well, Mark, I think you've literally interviewed so many Israeli spokesperson and so many Israeli, people who are in government even. I'm a journalist, and I don't see you, Mark, asking them to condemn the actions of the IDF. I don't see you asking them to condemn the killing of more than 1,600 children. Did you know that more than 700 children are also stuck under the rubble, and they're probably going to be also killed? So I don't understand why this obsession of asking Palestinians. I'm not a spokesperson for Hamas. I'm a journalist. I'm a journalist who had 30 members of my family killed in the last week. My best friend, who's also a journalist, and we were working together on covering the 2022 aggression on Gaza, he was killed in cold blood. He was wearing a press vest, he was wearing a helmet, and he was killed, with alongside at least more than 14 other journalists who have been targeted by Israel. So I don't think you're asking me about condemnation is what you should really be doing, because you've never done that to other Israelis. So what I condemn is the Israeli actions of killing Palestinian civilians and children over and over again, not only since the 7th of October.
And now, Yara, I take what you're saying on board, but I interviewed the editor of the Jewish Chronicle last weekend, and I put that point to him about Israel's behaviour towards Palestine. And I did the same with a former general in the IDF. So I certainly have held Israeli voices to account, and I'll be doing so in just a few minutes. But can you honestly not condemn both the behaviour of what you perceive to be Israeli cruelty, Israeli genocide, and that of Hamas on the 7th of October? Can you not agree that that's horrific too, and that it's terror?
Well, as a Palestinian journalist, and actually not just that, as a human, obviously the loss of any life is tragic. But what has been happening has been a genocide of Palestinians for the last 75 years. So if we're going to only look at what Hamas is doing now, we're ignoring the root cause of what's happening. We're ignoring the thousands that have been killed in Palestine. We're ignoring that more than 10,000 Palestinians have been killed since 2010. Since 2000. So if we're thinking about Hamas, let's just think for a second about the West Bank. Let's think about the circumstances in the West Bank and how people live there. How can you justify the killing of children? How can you justify the torture of minors? How can you justify the imprisonment of so many Palestinians there? Because you're going to ask me about the hostages by Hamas. How can you justify the 5,200 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons who are being tortured day by day? You see, I want an answer for that before.
Well, look, I'm so sorry to hear about your devastating loss, Yara, and thank you so much for sharing your views on the programme. I hope we speak again in the near future. My thanks there to war correspondent and journalist Yara Eid. Let's now speak to my next guest, and I'm delighted to welcome digital activist Lizzy Savetsky. Lizzy, your reaction to what you've just heard?
I'm not surprised to hear these messages of propaganda to say that Israel has been committing a genocide of Palestinians for 75 years is a complete lie. I just want to say that the Hamas charter calls for the extermination of the Jewish people. It is written in black and white. So the only genocide that we should be talking about is the genocide that Hamas wishes upon the Jewish people. Israel has presented peace proposals to the Palestinian leadership over and over again, and every single time they have been rejected. So we have wanted peace. We have tried to make peace happen, but we cannot live side by side with people who want to kill us. It is impossible. I wish that there was a way to rectify the situation and eradicate Hamas without a loss of life, but unfortunately, we are up against a terrorist organization who is currently holding their own people hostage because they want maximal casualties so that Israel will look as bad as possible. Also, the prisoners that are being held in Israel and tortured, as she said, are terrorists. So we're talking about people who have come into Israel or live there and tried to kill Jews for one reason, because they're Jewish. These are not people who want peace. These are not people who want a two-state solution. They're terrorists, and that is why they are in jail.
And Lizzy, what would you say to those who argue that Gaza is an open prison, that Palestinians are second-class citizens in the region, and that Israel is guilty of war crimes itself?
I would say that Gaza has been given billions of dollars from nations all around the world so that they could build an infrastructure, so that they could build schools, hospitals, and a better economic future for the Palestinian people who live there. But instead, they've used that money to line the pockets of their leaders and build tunnels of terrors and buy weapons. And so I would say that whatever living conditions that they're living in are their own making, and there's nobody to blame but their terrorist leadership, Hamas.
But Lizzy, do you not acknowledge any unacceptable behaviour or conduct by the Israeli forces over the years?
The IDF is the most moral army in the world. They drop leaflets and warn before attacks. They even hacked into the news in Gaza to warn the civilians there to leave. They went to the great lengths to do that. They have a special bomb that they drop to shake the roof of the building. I don't know another country that has a moral army. So if there are innocent civilians that are being killed, the tragic loss of lives there, the only culprit here is Hamas, because they will not let their civilians leave. They are keeping them there. They use their children and innocent people as human shields so that Israel will look bad and will have maximal casualties. It's just insane.
Lizzy, my deep thanks to your contribution to the programme as well. I wish we were speaking under happier circumstances and look forward to your return to the programme. Digital activist Lizzy Savetsky. Well, folks, you've heard from both sides. Mark Dolan tonight is the home of diverse opinion. What is yours? Mark@gbnews.com. Do Israel have a case to answer for the conflict in the Middle East?